Colleagues, thank you very much for your understanding. I've been informed that I don't understand it, but to comply with the American with Disabilities Act, we run subtitles on the air, and they only do it in 3-hour segments, so we have to stop at a 3-hour to allow it to catch up, and then we can reboot or something. So I thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt the momentum. But on the main motion, on Bill 246, any senator wish to be heard? On the main motion, Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to very briefly stand up in support of the good senator's initiative, Bill number 246/34, because just based on the explanation that is provided and the opportunity to be able to take advantage of repatriated revenues from companies that are U.S. companies that are operating in foreign land, certainly it opens a door of opportunity to be able to ensure that the government of Guam also has that option to benefit in terms of receiving some of these tax dollars. So I certainly stand in support of this initiative, and I thank our good colleague for providing an extensive description of exactly how this originated and how it could conceivably result in additional revenues for the government of Guam. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard? On the main motion, Vice Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, I totally commend the author for the idea on this bill, and I applaud the attempt that we are making to get some of that repatriated money and to benefit our government. And I think if this succeeds, then it's excellent. My only concern is after the public hearing, I think we received this from Gita, was a letter that, and this was kind of, I think, common knowledge in the past, that anytime we add another program to this QC, we you know, are inviting additional scrutiny and making it just a little bit vulnerable perhaps. But the only one I really want to put on the record is this number 3, where they say the intent of the program is to foster and spur valuable economic activity to Guam and not to provide tax dollars. The QC law dictates that applicants must demonstrate how their proposed activities will have a positive economic impact in Guam, as well as how they will create jobs, as well as other economic activities. In short, Gita would have no choice but to not recommend issuance of any QCs authorized under this proposed bill, as they would not meet the evaluation criteria. So they had earlier proposed that we call this a different, make it a special QC and not put it under their regular QC program, because I think of this application process that they have and how they would make a determination based on that application. The rest, I guess, it's just similar concerns, but I just want to put that on the record that there has been some objection, like literal objection to this bill, or concerns that we can't implement it under the QC, the current QC process. So I'm not sure if that can just be resolved after the bill's passed, or if that's something that needs to be resolved prior. I'm not sure. Or if we create a special, you know, application process or approval process for this type of QC. Perhaps Gita will be able to help us with that. But thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the main motion, any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Lee.
Susan Smasi, Mr. Speaker, I too rise to commend the author of this bill. I think we are all attempting to find ways to find unique ways to generate revenue for our government, especially during these challenging financial times. I do want to ask a few questions if the author would yield.
Please pose your questions.
In some of the written testimony that was provided to the committee on this bill from tax subject matter experts, they indicate that they support efforts to broaden the tax basis, but they can't see this bill being successful unless we first have a conversation with the U.S. Treasury Department. And I know that the author of the bill had described a little bit of these concerns in his opening statement, but it appears that several times in the past, Guam has enacted tax laws aimed at attracting foreign investment similar to this one. But when the beneficiaries of these changes turned out to be U.S. corporations or individuals, the U.S. Treasury Department routinely issued rulings and notices to close those loopholes that would allow U.S. people to benefit from these Guam laws. In fact, in the early 80s, Guam established a strategy to attract U.S. corporate finance transactions in Guam by allowing QC benefits and the promise of similar deductions to reduce their U.S. tax liability. The U.S. Treasury Department responded with Revenue Ruling RR 83-9, 1983-2, IRB-9, and this ruling effectively shut down the Guam strategy, denying all U.S. benefits to all U.S. corporations and limiting the availability of Guam QC benefits for tax purposes. Another example of this is the Guam Trust Law. As originally designed, the Guam Trust Law was meant to attract foreign and non-U.S. individuals to set up trusts in Guam for the protection of their home country assets with the certainty of U.S. law. All income earned by the trusts qualified for 100% GITA tax rebate. The Guam government benefited by keeping the tax due on trust income for a period of 6 months to a year before it was rebated. Some accountants and lawyers in the U.S. came up with a strategy to use the Guam Trust Law for U.S. individuals in a way that would prevent the Guam Trust income from being subject to U.S. tax, as well as our Guam taxes. The result was IRS Notice 2000-61, 200-49 IRB. This notice again prevented any U.S. individual from enjoying any U.S. tax benefit from the strategy by declaring that Guam trusts were considered foreign for U.S. tax purposes. And this made the income earned by Guam trusts immediately taxable in the United States. Routinely, the U.S. Treasury Department has prevented the U.S. territories from enacting tax laws with benefits to U.S. corporations and individuals at the expense of the U.S. federal Treasury, as one may assume. I'm only suggesting that before much effort is expended to make this bill law, that we have that discussion with the appropriate U.S. Treasury Department authorities to ensure there's support for this bill. And so my question to the author would be, have those discussions taken place, and why or why not?
Do you yield, Senator?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. First and foremost, those instances that were described, those were actions that were taken by this government that did not get pre-clearance from Treasury. And I won't advise that you get pre-clearance from Treasury. If Treasury is going to come back and say that something is not aligned with Treasury's policies, then let them. But I do want to elaborate, Mr. Speaker, on why Treasury came back on those specific transactions of a negative review and why they are unable to even have any kind of bearing on this action. Those actions that were described by the individual proffering the question were not specific to corporate income tax rebates. They were specific to U.S. corporate finance transactions, and they were specific to trust income, neither of which was implicitly granted as an authority to the territory through the Organic Act the way corporate income tax rebates were. And neither of those two transactions were either upheld by the Ninth Circuit as the corporate income tax rebate has been upheld by the Ninth Circuit. And that's why this bill is a very unique opportunity, because it goes directly to what we've been given and what the courts have upheld that we've been given. We've been given the right to rebate corporate income taxes. Repatriated foreign profits are corporate profits that generate corporate income taxes. And so those corporate income taxes are going to be coming, those corporate revenues are going to be coming back into the United States and getting taxed at a special corporate income tax rate of 15.5%, which was what was passed by the Trump tax reforms. And so since we've already been granted this authority by Congress and since it's been upheld by the courts, this is out of the jurisdiction of Treasury. If Treasury wants to come in and try and prevent it, we are the ones that can tell Treasury that this is not something that you're able to do based on what the Organic Act in Congress has authorized and what the courts have upheld. If Treasury wants to try and stop it, they would need to take congressional action or they would need to take us to court. So I would actually not advise going to Treasury and asking them. As a matter of fact, one of the testimonies that was provided by another industry expert here on Guam advised that we do this quickly and quietly, because the actions that would need to be taken to close this loophole isn't just a simple letter from Treasury or a simple finding that they can render. It would need congressional action or court action, and those take time. But in the meantime, because of the article that I shared that these businesses are moving swiftly, let's move swiftly and let's move quietly in doing so, as advised by the testimony of Mr. Joe Bradley, the economist of the Bank of Guam. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again, thank you to the author of this measure. We also received testimony from the Guam Economic Development Authority and the administrator of GIDA relating to this bill. And there were a number of issues and concerns that Mr. Rojas had outlined. They understand the intent of this bill, and again, they applaud these unique ways to generate revenue for the government. However, they had significant concerns that posed doubts as to whether the program is feasible. And they encouraged this body to take into account a number of these concerns before or as this bill moves through the legislative process. One of their concerns was that they're unclear as to the mechanics of this particular repatriation tax. They also call into question whether or not it would be likely that the IRS would allow Guam to provide this tax incentive, or worse, that it would open us up to the qualifying certificate program being federally scrutinized. And so I'd like to ask the author of this measure if he could speak a little bit to that and just opening a. The GIDA is constantly saying that the qualifying certificate is the only tool that they really have to spur economic development here on Guam. And so I guess my question to the author is, if he believes that the IRS would, he's talking about moving swiftly and quietly, but once the IRS is informed of what we're doing, should this bill pass, does he believe that this would open up the qualifying certificate program to additional federal scrutiny?
Do yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The short answer is I'm not sure, and here's why. The whole reason why the repatriation tax was lowered was to encourage repatriation. They want these companies to bring the money back into the United States. And the primary reason isn't necessarily to fill the U.S. Treasury. And, just a little backstory. The federal government deficit spends all the time. The U.S. government is able to print money. They're not looking to actually recapture this money so much as they are looking to try and boost the economic activity that would happen with these monies coming back into the United States. They want corporations to retain more of their earnings so they're able to pay out higher dividends or invest more in the United States. And that's exactly what this bill would do. These companies would be able to keep even more of their money because we'll be rebating 75% of it back to them. So if that's the true spirit of the law, which is what my interpretation is of this repatriation tax rate being lowered, is to encourage more of the money to come back in so more of the investment can happen in America. So I don't think that they would necessarily shut it off. If the concern is that it may put the QC program under more federal scrutiny, I'm of the mind that if this QC program is already in the Organic Act and it's already upheld by the courts, the executive branch, the IRS, can't just make a random decision to turn it off for us. This is an express power that's been granted to Guam and upheld by the courts. So I don't think they can necessarily turn it off, which gives us a very, very unique opportunity to make this transaction happen. Now, is it possible that IRS may turn around and say, well, then let's change that provision in the Organic Act? Yes, it is possible. But if we already consummate the contracts, if we've already locked it all in, then it's done. And that's why we've been advised to do this quickly and quietly, because if we can even just score one company of $3.5 trillion, it will be instantly transformative to our community. And I know that sometimes we see these large numbers and we think, oh, Guam, I don't even think, is that even remotely possible? Yes, it is. And I think that we need to stop trying to only use the QC program for small opportunities. Let's use it to go after the big ones. And let's lock it in. And let's flood billions of dollars into this community. And if Gita is concerned instead about trying to just keep the program alive, then are you really operating in the interest of economic development, or are you operating in the interest of self-preservation? I was actually quite disappointed with the letter from the Gita administrator. I would think that you would look for every single opportunity to take advantage of the tools that you have available to you. And if you can add 6 zeros or 9 zeros to make your transactions worth billions instead of just hundreds of thousands, then let's do it. Let's not look for reasons not to do it. And I'm so interested in passing this bill and having this body support me on that, because then we can look back in our history and we can say we had a window. Now, if this Gita administrator would rather not take that opportunity and instead go and fly around and try and pursue other opportunities in his own way, then that's his business. But we have a new administration perhaps coming up in January 1. And if that new administration wants to instead take this opportunity, then let's have it on the books. Let's pass this law and let's have it on the books. And let's not lock ourselves into small thinking by trying to hold on to small transactions when we can pass measures like this and score big wins for our people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lee, you still have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my colleague for his willingness to ask questions about this bill. And I too share the enthusiasm, and I'm really looking forward to, should this bill pass, if, capitalizing on these big wins from a big whale. But in my experience, when certain things sound too good to be true, many times they are. And so I just want to make sure that we're asking the requisite questions, and we're scrutinizing this, and we are taking the time to thoroughly address many of their concerns. So again, I thank him so much for his willingness to respond to these questions by several members of our community. I guess my last question I don't know if we're doing one round, but Gita had also raised that there is no evidence that shows that Guam has the authority to implement this specific tax incentive. So if the mover of this measure would be open to answering a question about legal authority determined, has any legal authority determined the legality and the applicability of this specific tax incentive to Guam law? I know he mentioned some court rulings prior, so if we could just revisit that. Gita had requested that a thorough legislative review of the legality of this proposed amendment is necessary prior to the bill's potential enactment to ensure that the government of Guam is authorized to implement it and it will not adversely impact our existing programs to include QC.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was actually the section that had me the most alarmed with respect to whether or not the Gita administrator fully understands his mandate and how that mandate is upheld. We absolutely have the legal authority to rebate corporate income taxes. That is actually the fundamental authority that's granted in the QC program. In fact, it's the only thing that we have had a court ruling further uphold that we are allowed to do. If there is any rebate that GITA and the qualifying certificate program can do, it is a rebate of corporate income taxes. And perhaps the GITA administrator is a little confused as to what repatriation is, but repatriation is the bringing back of corporate income taxes. So this is fully aligned with not only the authorizations that are currently being undertaken with the QC program by GITA, but it's the only mandate that also has a court ruling to uphold it. And so I was really, when I heard that, when I read that, that testimony, it made me really sit back and wonder, why are you saying that? Are you just trying to find a reason to not like the bill? Because otherwise, it doesn't make any sense for you to be saying something that is just so fundamentally wrong. So I don't know. I can't quite answer the question with respect to why they asked that, but I can say that it is absolutely incorrect. The fundamental authority of the QC program is to rebate corporate income taxes, and there is nothing more reaffirmed in that with respect to the responsibilities of GITA in administering the program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
My apologies, Mr. Speaker. Just one last question, and I think this was also raised during the public hearing process. And so I know that GITA had just mentioned that even if this bill passes legal muster and is enacted, it doesn't really provide us with any resources or provide resources to GITA or the government of Guam to market this new tax program. So I know that the author had mentioned that we should move quickly and quietly, but once we pass it, if we're too quiet, then maybe not enough people will know that they can take advantage of this. And so I know that there was a discussion about third-party agents, and there may have been substitutions to this bill. So if the mover of the, or if the author of this bill could just maybe discuss the third-party agents that would perhaps be eligible for a finder's fee, which is kind of the way that it was described in the public hearing. If you could just speak to that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, may I proceed with the inquiry? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As far as marketing the program goes, I think news stories clearly indicate that there is no shortage of effort to go all over the place and market. So I hope that they can kind of add that to their agenda. But that being said, Mr. Speaker, we did include a third-party provision in here. And the reason why we include this third-party provision is because there are a lot of entities out there that may have their eye on the ball and get rolling with this program if we're able to create an avenue for it to be incentivized. For example, Mr. Speaker, when we have large procurements here on Guam, like for example for a power plant or for the port or for any kind of like large projects, sometimes we have companies that want to do business here on Guam that aren't necessarily here yet, and so they use third-party agents to represent them, and those third-party agents, by virtue of the representation, are also compensated if the company wins the contract. This language creates that similar opportunity where our people, if you're here on Guam and you're licensed to do business here on Guam, you can represent a company and walk them through this process, whether GITA wants to get moving on it or not. And you can begin to get the entire process going so that these companies out there can take advantage of this opportunity. And if you do this, you can keep a 1% fee, and that's the amount that we've written into the law. Now, what does that 1% mean? It's actually pretty extraordinary. If you just so happen to be the guy who's able to be the Apple representative here on Guam, and they would repatriate the $252 billion through Guam, the way the law is written is first we would less out all the tax, and then you can assess your 1% fee on the remainder. The remainder after lessing out the tax is $242 billion. If you assess a 1% third-party fee on $242 billion, and you're the agent, you're going to collect a $2 billion fee. That's a huge incentive for third-party individuals who may have the right connections to get these businesses to take advantage of this, to go out there and to avail of it, and to say, hey, you know, uncle, I have an opportunity. And boom, they're the ones that start making it happen. And so at 1%, they can collect $2 billion in fees, but what happens also with that is because they were licensed to do business on Guam is we have a secondary tax opportunity once again. And based on the corporate income tax brackets that we have with the Trump tax reforms, that's another $670 million that Guam will bring in income taxes alone by having these agents facilitating these transactions. And that, by the way, Mr. Speaker, kind of addresses the concern that was raised about how does this create jobs or how does this create industry here on Guam. We can become a huge nexus for repatriating transactions, and we can have so many of our people become agents for these companies. There are hundreds of companies out there. Apple alone at $252 billion is just 7% of the $3.5 trillion. And in the article, if we recall, 90% of the companies are going to be repatriating some form of their income. So we can create a lot of jobs, we can open a lot of doors, we can have our accounting firms here, our financial experts here representing these companies. And one of the, this is something that I've always envisioned, Mr. Speaker, having worked at Bank of Guam and being an investment advisor. One of the industries, because you know how we talk about tourism, the military, and the government being the main legs that we stand on? On Guam, our second tier but very robust industries are finance, insurance, and telecommunications. Those second tier industries that are actually very, very strong are just a hairline away from actually blossoming into the next legs of our economy that can really stand up our island. If we can create these kind of transactions that are going to help grow our finance industry, all of a sudden we can finally have a four-legged stool. Because then these companies, these individuals who are these third-party representatives, they can take that earnings and reinvest it into establishing or growing their financial presence. So again, Mr. Speaker, this is just one of those opportunities that I think can really open a lot of doors. And if Gita doesn't want to do it, let's not allow the unwillingness of an individual or an agency to hold back a $1 billion opportunity for our people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Anything further, Senator Lee? Any other senator on the main motion? On the main motion, Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I have to applaud the author on this one, just because it's so out of the box. And again, he's been following, and he probably has a better understanding of the new federal tax law and this particular issue of repatriation. And I would have to imagine that when he combed through the new tax law and saw a potential window of opportunity for our island, he took it, or at least he's willing to take it. And again, I guess in my mind, when I first read about this and first read this bill, I really wasn't really sure how to do the analysis. I'm not a tax expert, and that's probably one of the weaker fields of understanding that I have. But that being said, I guess the next thought that came to my mind is, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. If we did not enact this, or if this was never even on our table, we wouldn't even have the possibility of earning extra income during this small window of opportunity. Because this is a one-time shot for these companies to repatriate their profits from abroad back into the country. So I would have to stand in favor of it. Now, if the federal government or any entity within the federal government wishes to try to put any restrictions on us so that we are not able to move forward, then let them. But until such time, we should take that shot, I believe. I do have a question, though, and the question would be to the author of this, is that since Guam's tax laws really just basically mirrors the U.S. income tax law. Does that then allow us, just by mirroring the tax law, does that allow Guam the ability to have the repatriation of profits, of foreign profits, come through Guam and then being able to be considered repatriated through Guam? And I'm not sure the answer. I need to at least ask the author if he would yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, that's the actual advantage of having the mirror tax system. For example, if we were to earn income here on Guam, corporate income, and you were to try to move that income into the United States, they wouldn't tax it again at the corporate rate. If you tax it here and you pay your taxes here, you're done. You don't need to pay taxes again. And so with the repatriation, if those companies repatriate their income through Guam and they pay their taxes here, the taxes are paid. They don't get taxed again when it goes over to the mainland side. And so this is it's just that really rare opportunity where our mirror tax system, the history of the QC program, the rulings of the court, the Organic Act provision that was subsequently taken out, but after the fact, I mean, we just have almost the perfect storm to be able to do something like this and to really benefit from it. So to answer the question, again, Mr. Speaker, yes, we do have the ability to receive these repatriated profits, and upon receiving it, taxing it, and rebating it, those repatriated profits are deemed having been taxed for U.S. tax purposes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And again, I appreciate the response. I have no knowledge on that, but I'll accept that explanation. But just to go on, and I won't go on much longer, again, it is a one-time opportunity. I guess if some of us look back, some of us who may be old enough to look back during the heyday of the Japanese economy, I know there's a lot of people now saying, shoot, if I would have just bought land back then in Tumon, before that all happened, I'd be a millionaire. In fact, we have several families, you know, and several of our own residents here who actually did take a chance before all that happened, without any knowledge of whether they were going to make a profit or not and whatnot. But here we are, several decades later. Those who did take that leap of faith back then have actually seen a good return on their investments back then. I see this as just one of those situations where there is a limited window, and if we can take advantage of it, if even it generates just a few $1 million, that's a few $1 million more than we have now. And so I don't see why we shouldn't support something like this. Again, there's no guarantee. I think the author will even concede to that there is no guarantee. But if we don't make the effort, if we don't take that chance, again, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I stand in full support of this measure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. On the main motion? On the main motion. If not, you're welcome to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to first make a motion to add Senator Regine Bisco-Lee as a co-sponsor. I understand that her office was working on a similar measure prior to us introducing this bill, so if there's no objections, I'd like to add her as a co-sponsor.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This, as the retiring speaker mentioned, I would also like to add Senator Jim Espadon as a co-sponsor, Mr. Speaker, if no objections.
Objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The retiring speaker is correct. There's no guarantees. I don't know if we're going to be able to do this in the ideal way to make it execute effectively. It would require people to really get behind the idea and move it forward. I would think that given our current financial situation, our debt, our challenges meeting our obligations, we would jump at any opportunity to be able to bring in some relief that isn't going to involve taxing our people more. And what just makes me have so much hope is that there's so many companies, there's so much money. We don't need to get 10% of them. We don't need to get 1% of them. We just need to get one of them. And if we just get one of them and we lock in this transaction and we make it happen, Mr. Speaker, instant relief. Instant relief. So I humbly ask my colleagues to support this. I will do, if we pass this, I will do whatever I can on my end to really try and see how we can make a transaction happen. I mean, there's so many different ways that we can reach out. A lot of these large multinational corporations, Mr. Speaker, they have government vice presidents in their executive level. I mean, there's just, with communications technology that we have today, it's not hard to reach these people and let them know, hey, by the way, this is an opportunity. Are you thinking about repatriating your income? If you are, this is an opportunity to get a 75% rebate on it. I mean, you just reach out to them and let them reach back. And then from there, we explain how it's going to happen and how the transaction will work out. We show them all the case law that shows that this is something that Guam has been authorized to do and how we're going to be able to do it. Just an example, Mr. Speaker, of how these things can work out. I believe it's the U.S. Virgin Islands, if I'm not mistaken, but one of our sister territories was able to bring in a rum company into their jurisdiction because they were able to provide them with a tax benefit that they were not able to avail of anywhere else. And by bringing them in, they were able to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars into their community by that one company taking advantage of a tax opportunity that particular territory was able to offer as an incentive. We have that opportunity here of this. It's validated by the courts. It's something that we can move on if we pass this bill. And so I humbly ask my colleagues to do so. And I really hope that this is something that we can have materialize and take advantage of, given the fact that based on that article, so many of these large companies are already looking at doing this as we speak. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the motion to send the bill down, any objection? Hearing none. Senator Lee?
Situus Masi, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to ask the Sergeant-at-Arms to please distribute the substituted Bill 250. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, I move to accept Bill 250-34LS as amended by the Committee on Innovation and Economic, Workforce, and Youth Development as substituted on the floor. Are we continuing?
Yes. To accept a substitute.
As substituted by the Committee on Innovation, Economic, Workforce, and Youth
Is
Development.
there any objection to accepting the substituted version? No? Thank you.
As amended, and then substituted on the floor. The version which has been passed out to our colleagues, including track changes for references, includes amendments that were reported out based on public testimony, and now includes changes made in consultation with various stakeholders like GDOL, the Guam Contractors Association, to address renewal provisions in the bill for H-2B workers, for GDOL, and the businesses that work for them. These changes were made to address the feedback which had recently been raised, concerns from GCA, and these concerns had been addressed. GCA now supports this bill in the substituted form, and I've made these changes in the substituted version to assure our colleagues that the committee has worked diligently with both GDOL and the industry to provide a workable path forward on this bill, to give us much needed investment in our local workforce while addressing the increased progress on incorporating alien labor to augment our local workforce. Again, I move to accept Bill number 250-34LS as amended by the Committee on Innovation, Economic, Workforce, and Youth Development and substituted on the floor.
Is there any objection to that? Did you object, Senator? No. Okay. Oh. Okay. Okay. You're recognized.
Situus Masi, Mr. Speaker, I move to place Bill number 250-34LS as substituted on the third reading file, and I'd like to chance to discuss it.
Okay. Just so the clerks don't jump me again, it should read, as amended by the Committee on Innovation and substituted on the floor. No, you keep saying I substituted. I know you're trying to use the shorten a shortcut, but they keep insisting to me
As
that I
amended
keep accepting.
and
Yeah,
substituted on the floor.
yes. Please.
Thank you. The purpose of Bill 240 is twofold. It would create a much-needed increased investment in our government through the Guam Department of Labor, and it would direct increased funding for training and expanding our local workforce in apprenticeable trades with the Guam Community College and other training partners. Bill 250 proposes to increase the fee per non-immigrant temporary worker from $1,091 to $2,091 while providing an exemption for local construction not directly related to the military buildup. I'll repeat that. Providing an exemption for local construction not directly related to the military buildup. So civilian projects could maintain the $1,091 fee that they had previously been paying. Our goal with this exemption is to support our local families and the construction industry that serves them by mitigating and preventing an increase in cost for local civilian projects. So working families interested in building a home or even local small businesses will not have to bear the impact of these increased fees. With the 4,000 H-2B workers that Guam is allowed through the 2018 NDAA for military-related construction projects, the increased fee could potentially bring an additional $4 million from federal projects towards strengthening our homegrown workforce in needed areas like the construction trades as well as tourism. Our bill has been amended to include feedback from stakeholders and leaders at the Guam Department of Labor, the Guam Community College, the business community, including the Guam Contractors Association. The committee and the bill's 11 co-sponsors have done a significant amount of work to make this measure balanced as it related to each of these key players in our island's workforce development and the desire to support the agency, both the agency working directly in administering programs like the Alien Labor Program and workforce development programs out of GDOL, Guam Community College, and our other training partners. I would like to briefly recap the amended changes, including the latest changes made to the substitute version that have garnered the support of 11 co-sponsors, construction industry leaders like GCA, and our public agencies, GDOL and GCC. So I want to address the 60-40 distribution. One amendment was to adjust the fee distribution on this increased revenue from 50-50 in the original bill to 60-40 between GCC and Guam Department of Labor. As the bill stands now, 60% of the fee goes to GCC to expand workforce development programs like the Guam Apprenticeship Program, and the remaining 40% would go to DOL to expand workforce training programs, contract critical legal services, and administer and enforce compliance in areas like the Alien Labor Program. These programs will receive much-needed investment to both support the current structure while strengthening and expanding our workforce to lessen our dependence on alien labor, should this bill be passed into law. Another amendment further expands GDOL's use of the funds. So currently, GDOL is mandated to use funds to produce a quarterly unemployment report. We wanted to provide GDOL the administrative flexibility to do additional resource and reporting as needed. For example, to utilize funds on other mandated reporting, like should the legislature mandate a report on minimum wage impact, as has been done in the past, they could use this funding to be able to do so. Funding to contract for needed legal services is also a provision in this bill to acquire critical legal support and guidance in employment law, human resources, and administrative law. This will provide better customer and constituent services for every GDOL division and every industry on Guam, from workers' compensation to wage and hour. One of the changes that came from the public hearing that I'm most excited about is earmarking funding for local training. With passage of this bill, we would be directing these funds to GDOL for additional training programs for job seekers that strengthen our local workforce and support our businesses. Right now, GDOL and Guam businesses have only had the opportunity to take advantage of very restricted, federally funded training programs. Now, Guam's unique economy and industries can access through homegrown funding for training programs that will support not just the economy of today, but the businesses and workforce that we need to support for tomorrow in tourism, but also in technology and other industries that can work with GDOL to train and invest in our local workforce. More information on the need for these programs and utilization by GDOL has been included in our committee report. GCC's funds currently go toward financial assistance, administrative and instructional costs within the apprenticeship program, as well as to advertising and outreach for their apprenticeship programs. The apprenticeship training programs, like that at GCC, is an investment program. An investment not just in terms of money, although that's a side benefit. Rather, it's an investment in our human capital. When employees complete this program, which involves OJT, on-the-job training with their employer, and of course work at GCC under the auspices of the U.S. Department of Labor, they will have earned a Journey Worker Certificate at no cost to the employee or the company, gaining expertise that will enable them to provide sustained quality service for their company's customers, and gaining a sustainable profession that will enable them to improve their quality of life and that of their family. The employees' skill levels are elevated so they provide better quality service and higher productivity, and they can earn higher pay. The employer has invested in the employee, which provides the employer with a sustainable workforce. The employer also reaps cost savings through tax credits provided by the Guam Registered Apprenticeship Program, strengthened by this bill. And the community benefits all around because we have a more skilled labor force. We have amended the bill further to allow GCC's portion of the funds to be used toward pre-apprenticeship program facility upgrades and equipment within the Guam Department of Education, which they have piloted. But this requires direct investment made available through this bill. Passage of this bill will assist in creating a pipeline for future workers and ensuring that Guam's youth are better aware of the potential careers in our island's most needed areas. It will build a foundation and an interest from a young age in further exploring these types of careers. And I should point out that the last time this fee was raised in the legislature, it was specifically pointed out by the main sponsor that raising the fee would assist in de-incentivizing our dependence on foreign labor, while requiring the funds to be devoted for building up our local workforce. This bill strengthens the emphasis on utilizing these funds to build up professions that we're using H-2 workers for today. We have the opportunity to turn the military buildup on its head by ensuring that our local workers and the government and businesses meant to support them are investing in our local workers, despite the utilization of alien labor when necessary. So I'd just like to emphasize that this is an opportunity for us to take the gains of the military buildup that so many people are really invested in and make those gains today. As requested by industry stakeholders like GCA, the bill also allows an exemption in the increased fee for contracts executed before the enactment of the bill that are non-negotiable, and allows for a 6 months renewal fee and then the proration amount for any months the worker is approved for in excess of the initial 6-month renewal. Some of the feedback that we received on this bill and in many areas of our government relates to transparency and accountability. In that spirit, we've also included mandates for a financial audit by OPA of the use of the Manpower Development Fund, as has been required for other special funds. So again, Bill 250, as substituted, has really been a collaborative effort among key stakeholders of our island's workforce development, all while keeping at the top of our mind what's best for our local workforce and also local industry, with special attention to projects not related to the military buildup. To recap, we've had government, our education, and training stakeholders, and the construction industry all come together to help strengthen this measure. At its core, both GDOL and GCC receive an increase in funds to support their critical and ongoing efforts to expand and support our local workforce. That's something that I think we can all get behind. Lastly, I'd like to reemphasize that this bill also serves as a disincentive for using non-immigrant workers as a primary source of labor needs. Although the bill already provides various levels of protection for our local workforce, increasing this fee while exempting projects not directly related to the military buildup will provide another measure of protection to our local workforce, while also directly supporting stronger investment in Guam's workforce development. Through this fee increase, we hope to help fill the gaps in our labor workforce and bring the needed revenues to support services provided to our people. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Speaker Cruz, Vice Speaker Terlahi, Senators Ada, San Agustin, Nelson, Morrison, Torres, Muña, Castro, and Estevez, who've signed on as co-sponsors of this measure during a time of needed revenues for our government. And I ask all my colleagues for their support on this bill as well. Sujus Masi.
Thank you, Senator. On the main motion, any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my initial concern with this bill would have been that it would raise the cost of construction here on Guam, and ultimately that would trickle into the housing prices. But the way the bill was written, and I commend the author for it, it attempts to not increase the fee for projects unless those projects were only military projects. And I just wanted to cite that particular section. The Guam Department of Labor may waive the increase of the fee. This is on page 3, starting on line 18. For each non-immigrant temporary worker working exclusively on civilian construction projects not related to planned construction projects of the military realignment occurring on Guam, as indicated in the project summary sheet of the employer's approved temporary labor certification or on business activities not related to construction projects on Guam. This was something that my office actually was taking a look at during that period prior to the district court ruling that is trying to reopen up the H-2B visas for our civilian community. But we came across something, Mr. Speaker, several months ago that caused us not to introduce the bill. And it's an actual case, and I'm hoping legal counsel can help us here because I want to make sure that this case doesn't apply in this instance. And the case is James versus Draco Contracting Company. The element of discrimination becomes important only in a case where a tax, which would otherwise be permissible, is aimed at the taxpayer because of his relation to the government. Of course, a state cannot lay a heavier burden upon those contracting with the government simply because they are such contractors. A discrimination of that nature on its face spells a hostile purpose, an intent to hinder and burden the government, to impede its operations, and to discourage dealing with it. This particular case, Mr. Speaker, was basically a decision that said that you cannot levy a special tax on a contractor just because they're doing business with the government. And so if we're going to be levying a higher fee on these H-2B visa workers because they are not able to get the waiver due to the fact that their summary said that they're working on the base, I'm concerned that that might be viewed as discriminating against that particular contractor because they are doing business with the government. And so if that's not the case, then that opens up the opportunity for a measure like this, and we can perhaps even try and capture even more revenue if it does turn out to be something we can do by making the fee even higher and then creating that kind of a waiver. But that's the reason why we didn't move forward with it when we were working on it on the research phase in my office, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not an attorney. I don't know if this case law may actually apply, but that was our interpretation at the time. But I would like to yield to legal counsel if they can review this case and make a determination as to whether or not that particular case may cause the waiver to create a discriminatory tax on those companies that are doing business with the government. If I may ask legal counsel to clarify.
All right, maybe this is the perfect time to break. I understand that some people have some commitments this evening, and I know that a number of us have committed to the Bank of Guam's economic forum tomorrow morning at 8 until I've received text at least that some people are going to that, and so let's start at 10. Please be as punctual as possible, everybody. 10 o'clock, I'm even making it later, so 10 o'clock. In the meantime, legal counsel will be given instructions to address the James Draco case, and then we can continue discussion tomorrow morning, all right? We stand in recess until 10 tomorrow morning.